On a cold, bleak night, Susan Smith sat behind the wheel of her car, her fingers nervously drumming on the steering wheel. A treacherous silence enveloped everything around. In the back seat, in their child's safety seats, her two sons, 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alex, were peacefully sleeping. To an outsider's eye, it was just an ordinary scene, a mother out for an evening drive with her kids. However, in Susan's mind, like an old cracked vinyl record, the same intrusive thought kept spinning over and over: how much simpler it would be if they weren't here. The woman stopped the car, shifted it into neutral, and got out. Slowly, she pushed the vehicle forward, and it rolled towards the body of water. The wheels softly crunched on the ground. Susan took a deep breath and stepped back. The car submerged into the lake like a dump truck loaded with gravel. From inside, a sharp, albeit muffled by the splash of water, cry rang out. Within about 30 seconds, only lazy ripples remained on the surface. 3 hours later, Susan would be crying in a police station. Within a day, the entire country would see her on TV, a sobbing woman begging for her children to be returned. And in 9 days, she would confess that the search was futile because she knew from the very beginning where her sons were. Susan Smith was born on September 26, 1971, in the small town of Union, South Carolina. She was the third, youngest child and only daughter in the family. Her childhood was far from ideal. When the girl was just 6 years old, in 1977, her father Harry took his own life. This event became a real shock for young Susan, leaving behind an oppressive feeling of loss and emotional emptiness. The girl tried her best to cope with the trauma, seeking solace in simple childhood hobbies. She started collecting coins and often listened to audio recordings of her late father's voice, as if trying to preserve a piece of his presence in her life. Shortly after her husband's death, Susan's mother, Linda, remarried. Her chosen one was Beverly Russell Jr., a divorced man with 3 children from his previous marriage. In society, he was respected as a successful salesman and a member of the religious community in South Carolina. But as soon as the house doors closed, his behavior changed dramatically. Some time after the wedding, the stepfather began to harass his 15-year-old stepdaughter with indecent intentions. Unable to find support among her family, the girl decided to confide in the school psychologist about the harassment. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, the specialist immediately informed Susan's mother about the incident. Upon hearing the truth, Linda bluntly asked her husband if he was really guilty of what her daughter had said. Beverly admitted his guilt, promising that it would never happen again, and agreed to attend family psychotherapy. But these measures proved insufficient. Later, he returned to his old habits. Susan found herself locked in a vicious circle, alone with her experiences, having no one to rely on. All these events did not pass without a trace and led to the development of a serious form of depression in the girl. It is quite likely that the vulnerability to such psychological disorders was inherited, as her father had also suffered from depression in his time. Already at the age of 13, Susan made several attempts at self-harm, trying in this way to release her inner pain. Despite all the difficulties, Susan still managed to graduate from high school in 1989. Soon after graduation, she started a romance with a married man, which lasted for some time. But as soon as her lover broke off the relationship, the girl's emotional state rapidly deteriorated. The breakup became another strong shock for her, significantly deepening the already existing psychological problems. It was then that she finally dared to seek help from a doctor. He diagnosed her with an adjustment disorder, which explained her unstable behavior and frequent emotional outbursts. Despite her fragile mental state, at the age of 19, Susan married 20-year-old David Smith. They got married shortly after the girl became pregnant with their firstborn, Michael. The couple worked together at the Winn-Dixie supermarket, and soon after the birth of their older son, in 1993, their second boy, named Alexander, was born. But the couple's family life was far from ideal. David grew up in an extremely strict family of Jehovah's Witnesses and had suffered from severe emotional upheavals from an early age. The year they got married, he lost his brother to the incurable Crohn's disease, and soon after, David's father attempted suicide. The young family gradually accumulated psychological difficulties, which affected their interpersonal relationships. Susan and David sometimes separated but always got back together shortly after. During one of these periods of separation, in 1994, Susan became entangled in a new romance. Her chosen one was Tom, an attractive bachelor who was considered one of the most desirable grooms in town. He worked with her in the same company and was the son of her direct boss. Susan cherished the hope that she had finally found a reliable life partner. But her girlish dreams were not destined to come true. Tom did not want to tie himself down in marriage with a woman who already had 2 children. Moreover, in his opinion, they had 2 different views on life, and Susan's behavior raised certain doubts in him. In October 1994, Tom wrote Susan a letter in which he informed her that he was leaving her. Later, he recalled that their last conversation took place on October 25. During the conversation, Tom learned that David was aware of some facts that, if made public, could harm his reputation. It later emerged that this was about Susan's with her stepfather, which had been going on for years. In response to this revelation, Susan tried to humiliate Tom by hinting that he had allegedly had sexual relations with his own father. Enraged, Tom demanded that she get out immediately. And just about 3 hours later, the tragedy occurred. On the same day, October 25, 1994, Susan called the emergency service with a shocking statement. An unknown man had stolen her car, in which her sons, 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alexander, were in the back seat. According to her, the perpetrator jumped into the car when she stopped at a red traffic light, pulled her out of the cab and drove away. In a panic, the woman ran to the nearest house and begged them to call the police. Over the next 9 days, Susan often appeared in front of TV cameras, tearfully pleading for the return of her boys. She addressed the kidnapper, asking him to take care of her sons and swearing to do everything possible to bring them home. Her emotional statements were broadcast across the country, and thousands of viewers followed the developments. However, soon some people began to notice inconsistencies in her story. The investigators also began to doubt the veracity of her words. They found out that the traffic light at the intersection where the crime allegedly took place could not have turned red in the absence of other traffic nearby. In addition, the police noted that the details of her story changed slightly with each new interrogation. And instead of focusing on the search for her missing children, Susan asked her friend several times if Tom was going to come to her. Such behavior seemed strange for a mother who had just lost her sons. Susan underwent several polygraph tests, but the results were inconclusive. This only heightened the suspicions of the investigation. Soon the police concluded that her story was a complete fabrication and that the woman herself might be involved in the disappearance of her children. Some of Susan's acquaintances recalled that during those days, she constantly asked if Tom would come to her, which seemed highly inappropriate given the circumstances. It appeared that while the police and volunteers were searching for her sons, Susan was more concerned about her own romantic relationship. David, Susan's husband, despite all these contradictions, continued to believe in his wife's innocence. He even tried to help her pass the polygraph, advising her on what to focus her thoughts on. However, no test confirmed her truthfulness. Despite this, the man criticized the actions of the police, believing that they were wasting time on interrogations instead of searching for the real criminal. An unexpected turn occurred on November 3, 1994. Susan finally confessed. She told investigators that on October 25, she had driven to the lake intending to drown herself along with the car. But at the last moment, she changed her mind, left the car in neutral, and watched it roll into the water. The woman indicated the exact location of the sunken vehicle. When divers arrived at the scene, they found the car with the bodies of Michael and Alexander inside. The boys were still strapped into their child seats, one of which was pressed against the glass so closely that a small hand was touching the window. As it later turned out, the investigators did not believe Susan's version from the very beginning but had no direct evidence of her guilt. They even searched the same lake but could not find the car because they only searched within 10 meters of the shore. In reality, the car was located 37 meters away. No one imagined that the current could have dragged it that far. Susan's trial was not televised. The judge made this decision, fearing that the presence of cameras could affect the course of the proceedings, as happened during the O.J. Simpson case. During the hearings, the defense insisted that Susan suffered from a mental disorder as a result of the shocks she experienced, including her father's death and her stepfather's cruel treatment. The lawyers argued that she had intended to commit suicide together with her sons but changed her mind at the last moment. On the other hand, the prosecution portrayed Susan as a manipulator who committed the crime only because Tom had rejected her advances, not wanting to tie himself to a woman who already had children. After 2 hours of deliberation, the jury delivered a verdict: Susan was found guilty of first-degree murder. On July 22, 1995, the court sentenced Susan to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Prosecutors insisted on a harsher punishment, but the jury took into account the defendant's difficult childhood. Susan is serving her sentence at the correctional facility in Greenwood, South Carolina. Since her conviction, she has repeatedly tried to appeal the verdict, claiming abuse in her marriage, but her ex-husband categorically denied these accusations, and the investigation found no evidence to support her words. In 2015, Susan made a written statement to the media, claiming that her actions were not premeditated and her motives were misinterpreted. She insisted that her actions were not related to a desire to maintain a relationship with Tom, but all the evidence presented in court indicated the opposite. Susan maintained that she acted unintentionally and without a specific motive. According to her, at the moment of committing the crime, she was not aware of her actions and was in an unstable emotional state. However, while serving her sentence, she repeatedly violated the rules. In particular, she was caught using prohibited substances and having improper relations with 2 prison employees. One of them later said that Susan herself initiated the contacts and persistently sought their development. In August 2024, Susan found herself at the epicenter of a scandal once again. She came into contact with the director of a documentary film and provided him with information about her friends, family, and even the victims of her actions, including her ex-husband David. This director allegedly transferred money to Susan's account, for which she was punished by being banned from using the phone, tablet, and visiting the prison store for 90 days. This incident occurred shortly before she was to appear before the parole board. After serving 30 years in prison, Susan gained the right to petition for release. At the hearing, her ex-husband David, the father of the deceased Michael and Alexander, spoke. He stated that the past 30 years had been a difficult ordeal for him, but he came to defend the memory of his sons. David reminded that on that fatal night, Susan made a conscious choice. Her act was not a mistake or a tragic accident. According to him, she never expressed sincere remorse, never tried to contact him, and never asked for forgiveness. David recounted that her actions had forever changed his life, and although he had managed to cope with the consequences, he had never seen the slightest regret on her part. In 1995, state laws provided for the possibility of releasing life prisoners after 30 years, but he emphasized that 30 years behind bars was only 15 years for each murdered son, and such a term could not be considered a fair punishment. David Smith begged the parole board not to release Susan. He stressed that her crime was not just a mistake, but a deliberate act for which one should not be given a chance at freedom. He emphasized that she had never shown genuine remorse and that he, as a father, would continue to fight for the memory of his sons. Susan was present at the hearing virtually. She tried to justify herself, saying that she regretted what had happened, but it was impossible to change the past. When asked by the commission, she replied that on the night of the crime, she was not under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Her lawyer referred to work with psychologists, and Susan stated her intention to continue therapy if released. She also apologized to those who participated in the investigation, especially to those who discovered the car with the children's bodies. She insisted that she was not trying to hide but was simply frightened, not knowing how to tell her loved ones the truth. The commission rejected the request for release, but in 2 years, Susan will have the opportunity to petition again. This refusal became another confirmation that neither the court nor society is ready to allow her to return to a normal life. Despite statements of remorse, her behavior in prison and evidence of the intentionality of the crime indicated otherwise. Thank you for watching this story. Write your thoughts about it in the comments. Don't miss the future videos, subscribe and like the channel. Take care of yourself and people you love.